Hello, this is John at Dry Tavern Road, and today I wanted to go over my favorite concerts of a lifetime in honor of Low Noise Jason Skilz, 800 subs, and congratulations on that. I learned of this through Brian at EmbryonicRobot and felt compelled to put the list together with some slight modifications at the end. First off, number 15, Wings Over America. This actually, my friend bought a ticket for my 18th birthday. Saw this in 1976. Seeing a real live Beatle. Paul McCartney was amazing. He played the Wing compositions as well as a few choice Beatle tunes. At the very end, Ringo Starr jumped up on stage, but did not play drums. Still, seeing two Beatles on one stage was amazing. Number 14, in 2012, saw an artist I've been following most of my life, Sade. She played in northern New Jersey. John Legend was the opening act. She had a fantastic horn section, rhythm section, a great night of soul, covering at that time her roughly 30 years of incredible music. This past summer, my daughter and I went and saw Dead & Company here in, I live in the Philadelphia area, Citizens Bank Park. It was a fantastic night. Had Mickey Hart and Bob Weir of the original band, obviously. Bill Kreutzmann, the drummer, had pulled out earlier on the tour. Still a fantastic time to see what could be among the last performances of a great group, one that I've been a fan of forever. 2012, again at the baseball stadium, Roger Waters, his rendition of The Wall, where they recreated the wall across the outfield, building it piece by piece throughout the show. It was epic, an absolute spectacle. Of course, it missed three members who actually constitute Pink Floyd in its current incarnation. But Roger Waters, it's his kind of magnum opus, and it was fantastic to see this performed live. If you see my channel, I have shown this album a couple times. This is X, the band X, originated in Los Angeles. I had a chance to see them several times in the late 70s and 80s, but a very memorable performance is when I had a chance to take my son to see them in 2004. He was 13. It was a school night, but it was winter. There was snow threatening. My wife was not crazy about the idea of him being out late in Center City, Philadelphia, seeing a punk band, but I assured her everything would be fine. I'd get him home. X was newly reunited at that point. I have seen them since then, but they put on a fantastic performance, all four original members performing, and seemed genuinely thrilled with the audience reaction. And I know my son really appreciated it. And the key stat is, as we drove home, the snowflakes began, and it was a snow day the next day. I can't say the Beach Boys due to legal reasons, but Brian Wilson and Al Jardine, I saw in Atlantic City in 2013. And it was just a joy to see Brian Wilson, to be in the same room as Brian Wilson, and to hear him with a 7-piece band just rejuvenate all of his hits. He didn't miss a one. And Al Jardine obviously was happy to be there and be a part of that component. It's kind of unfortunate. I know there are different incarnations of the Beach Boys versus Brian Wilson. But ultimately, to see the man who's responsible for so much amazing music was terrific. This is actually a French pressing, in effect, a greatest hits album. In 1994, watching MTV, I had a chance to see Nine Inch Nails for the first time. And it had a huge impact on me at that point. I'd never really, was not familiar at all with that kind of industrial, just heavy music that Trent Reznor created. This, like X, is a band I share a fandom with my son. We saw him perform in 2008. And this is actually my favorite album with Teeth, though I have most of them as well as a lot of his soundtracks where Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross do some amazing purely instrumental music for the most part. But Trent Reznor is actually from the state I'm in, Pennsylvania, from Erie, Pennsylvania. He brought that up a couple times, talking about Eastern Pennsylvania versus Western Pennsylvania and which one was cooler. Been a Steely Dan fan since middle school. And one of the things was during their heyday, really, they didn't perform because they didn't feel they could recreate their music on stage. Obviously, technology caught up with them, and I did see them perform in 2005 in Atlantic City, and they just put on a magnificent show. Lucky to see Walter Becker in his prime. Donald Fagen was magnificent. The entire ensemble, from the horns, the drummer, was front and center, just really putting together a first-class presentation of the Steely Dan catalog. So again, not seeing them maybe at the height of their glory, but being in the same room and hearing those songs was just a fantastic musical experience. I thought I'd put Bob Dylan a bit higher, but he comes in at a number 6 spot. I saw him at first time in 1985, where Tom Petty was the backing band and kind of just predated the Never-Ending Tour by a year. The show that I am talking about here took place in 2006, where Larry Campbell had left, Charlie Sexton had left, but he's put together just a fantastic band. And the big variable this night was he had an energy and a vocal range that I didn't feel coming across the other times I'd seen him. The Raconteurs band opened the show. It's Jack White's band in the at that time period in the early 2000s. But this show, of the probably 15 or 20 that I've seen overall, was the one I really thoroughly enjoyed the most. Number 5, be Radiohead. Saw them in 2008, and this show that I last saw was in 2018. This is actually their last studio album, came out in 2015. Moon-Shaped Pearl. And the show was the last one of their North American tour, and to the best of my knowledge, might have been their last show, at least in the US, as Radiohead. I know now there have been some side projects, and I would love to see Radiohead get back together. This album is now 8 years old, but they did put on a fantastic show. It was the second of a 2-night run, both sold out, with a very appreciative audience. Number 4, The Smiths. This is back in 1985, and I lived in Los Angeles. I grew up in Los Angeles, and thanks to K-Rock Radio, who played pretty much every English band at that period, became a huge Smiths fan. None of my friends were Smiths fans, but I went solo to this show at the Hollywood Palladium and just absolutely blown away by how great they were. Seeing a band that was roughly my age at that time and creating this type of music with the lyricism, the virtuosity of Johnny Marr, the amazing bass of Andy Rourke, the percussion, and of course Morrissey, was an incredible show. A very appreciative audience, and still listen to Smiths this day. My kids have actually gone to see Morrissey in his recent tour here in Brooklyn and Philadelphia. So we're definitely a Smiths fan. Smiths family fandom, tough to say. Number 3 is an artist, a Canadian artist, Jane Siberry. I saw her perform at a very small venue, the Sellersville Theater, which seats about 150 people. And it was probably only a third full. So Jane just asked everyone to move down to the front so that we, would be a tighter, more intimate group. And she went on to perform as if she was playing at Madison Square Garden or a huge venue. It was right around Christmas. She had holiday headdress on. Her vocal backup duo was with her on every song, and I was just amazed by the performance and the commitment to the audience in terms of making sure that every last person in that Sellersville Theater got more than they could have ever expected in her performance. Jane Siberry, slightly under the radar. I guess her biggest hit is When I Was a Boy. Love is Everything is a song that I've always been drawn to from her. And very, very, very happy that I saw her perform that night. Number 2, Stevie Ray Vaughan. This is in 1986 on a very, very cold New Jersey night, late November. And Capitol Theater, again, I'm not sure of the seating, but maybe 800 to 1,000, so not a huge arena by any means. But Stevie Ray and Double Trouble just put on a blazing show. I've always been drawn to the blues, and I had just never, ever seen anyone to that point or since play the guitar like Stevie Ray did that night. It was extraordinary. The album, and unfortunately I don't have a lot of his albums. It's something I really have to work on in my collection. But the Live Alive album pretty much covers roughly that time period. Stevie Ray would ultimately, before his last album, In Step, regain sobriety and said he wished he could have, re-recorded Live Alive because he felt there was some, failings or miscues in it, but there were none that night in Passaic, New Jersey. And it's also to note that the friend and I, my friend who drove when we got out of the show and we're just walking on air, cold air by that, his car had been towed. So we had to pretty much wander around beautiful Passaic, New Jersey to find car lot, the impound lot, pay the fee. But it didn't matter. It was totally worth it to see Stevie Ray. And last but not least, number 1 is a band, Led Zeppelin. I think in 1977, I didn't listen to anything but Led Zeppelin, morning, noon, and night. I skipped over the acoustic songs, of course, being the idiot teenager that I was. But this show was at the Forum in Los Angeles, and it was, I believe, a year after Song Remains the Same. The movie came out, so I was somewhat prepared for it. But luckily, at this show, they were playing quite a bit from Physical Graffiti, which is the album of the moment at that time and one that I absolutely loved. It was an amazing performance. Just Robert Plant had everyone in that audience in the palm of their hand. So this really was a significant show and has to be in my number one. There was a few running for it, but this one was amazing. So I began talking about Wings, which I saw in 1977 at the Forum. This is a year later. And not unlike the drummer Ringo Starr, I have to say the drummer Ringo Starr, I think I could just say Ringo Starr. Keith Moon actually jumped up on stage during this show and pretty much collaborated on a 40-minute Moby Grape drum solo with John Bonham. So that was kind of the note of that performance. So those are my top 15. As to groups that, a category I just want to include is groups that I did see, but maybe wish for a redo. I love The Clash, and I saw them open for The Who at the LA Coliseum. It was on one of The Who's last farewell tours. So love The Who. It's just having them play in a gigantic 100,000 seat open stadium. Not the greatest venue. Would have loved to have seen them in a club. Number 2, Grateful Dead. I did see them collaborate, or pretty much collaborate with Bob Dylan in the 1987 tour that took place again in a mega football stadium, Giant Stadium, which is right outside New York City in New Jersey. It was about 110 degrees, and the heat and the crush of humanity took a little bit of the edge off the audience experience. This album has been released, Dylan and the Dead. It's just not one of the better performances, unfortunately, by either artist. I'm very glad I went to it because I got to see Jerry Garcia, which was terrific. But had I the chance, I would have loved to have seen the Grateful Dead in a more intimate and a much cooler environment. And third, in the saw but wish I could have a redo, would be Van Morrison. Saw him at the Beacon Theater, New York City, 1988. And it was just a night where Van obviously didn't come to play. He was indifferent, almost cantankerous during the performance. And literally during one of his ballads, Have I Told You Lately That I Love You, his chorus was, Have I Told You Lately, blah, blah, blah. And that's a real quote from Van. I've heard the 40th anniversary of Astro Weeks that Van Morrison released. He did that in the Hollywood Bowl, and every time I listen to it, I wish I'd been at the Hollywood Bowl when that was performed instead of the Beacon Theater that night. I had some honorable mentions that I also wanted to include. They didn't make the top 15. Again, this is an additional, old guy category. Haven't seen a lot of shows. I just didn't want to leave them out. I wanted this to be more complete, maybe. Bruce Springsteen, LA Sports Arena, 1982. I saw the Beach Boys without Brian Wilson in 1973 when I was 15. I saw The Who, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, with The Clash, and then I actually seen them twice in 2006 and then again in 2009 here in Philadelphia. My son's a Who fan. Saw Muddy Waters and Johnny Winters at the Roxy Theater in Hollywood, 1978. Saw The Police, Hollywood Park, Horse Racetrack, 1984, the Synchronicity Tour. Genesis at the Forum. I saw in the mid-80s. Peter Gabriel, 1982, Universal Amphitheater. Elvis Costello, again, 1981, Universal Amphitheater. REM at the Greek Theater. And then an interesting one in the late 80s, I saw Roy Orbison in 1987, and Katie Lang was his background vocalist. And then finally, I was kind of the dad that would drive my kids and their friends to concerts, saw Lady Gaga when her first album was released, playing at the Susquehanna Center, which seats about 3,000. People that I never saw, but wish I had, Bob Marley played at Santa Cruz, California, which is in Monterey Bay, just south of San Francisco. He would do 3 p.m. shows and 8 p.m. shows, and I had opportunity to go to both, but didn't do so. Pink Floyd, while I saw Roger Waters perform The Wall, would have loved to have been in Los Angeles at the Sports Arena when The Wall was released, and they built The Wall. I believe they only did that in Los Angeles and New York, as well as London and Paris, I believe. But to actually have seen that tour, that's one I would love to have seen. Joni Mitchell, at any point, would have loved to have seen her. David Bowie, huge fan. Leonard Cohen, loved to have seen. I enjoy his concert videos tremendously. And finally, Roxy Music, who is a band I've mentioned before on this channel, one of my favorite bands. And finally, to wrap this magnum opus up, growing up where I grew up, we would get tickets to go see TV shows and premieres of movies or test runs of movies to get audience feedback. But the Midnight Special TV show recorded the artist into Santa Monica Civic, which is right near where I grew up. So I saw Joe Walsh perform Rocky Mountain Way 3 times. Again, these were not shows. They were just there to record the hit. But still, a lot of fun seeing that. Thin Lizzy, I saw in that situation. The Ramones. So those 3, again, you would go, line up, you didn't know who you were going to see. You'd see them, you'd be there roughly an hour, and then that was the show. So it wasn't a complete concert. In 1998, my friend who worked for a corporation that sponsored the Grammys had tickets to Radio City Music Hall in New York. And as fate would have it, that was the year Bob Dylan won the Grammy and performed the famous soy bomb incident where a dancer was jumping around with soy bomb written on his chest. And no one was sure if it was part of the act or just a soy bomb streaker. So that was amazing. But in that show as well, Pavarotti was supposed to perform, but he was sick. So Aretha Franklin actually sang an operatic number that was incredible. Celine Dion did the song from Titanic. Fiona Apple was there. She had just put out her first album. And finally, Fleetwood Mac. And the last thing I want to talk about is my office, the company I worked for, was in Midtown. And occasionally people have tickets. We were diagonally across from the Ed Sullivan Theater where Dave Letterman did his TV show. So they had tickets, again, kind of a cold, rainy night. I said, sure. The show starts at 5:30, but the musical guest, just as I walked up, they pretty much closed. I think it's 58th Street, right by the Winterlands. And it set up a huge stage. And the musical guest that night, who performed after the show, was Rage Against the Machine. It was pretty much tied into a local New York radio station, but if you're part of the Letterman audience, you could flow into it. So I decided to, and saw Killing in the Name of and all of their early work, and that was a great show. That was like a half-hour show, and again, it was free. So, okay, that is the most memorable concerts of my lifetime. I hope to see many more moving forward, and thank you for watching.